Imagine a military operation involving two massive Lewis machine guns, heavy trucks, and thousands of rounds of ammunition, all deployed against an enemy that stands 6 feet tall and runs at 50 kilometers per hour. This was the scene in the Campion district of Western Australia in November of 1932, a military campaign that turned into one of the most unexpected defeats in history. How could a modern government, armed with automatic weapons, fail to stop a group of giant birds from eating wheat crops? Hi everyone, I am Sarah, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are exploring the bizarre true story of the Great Emu War, and along the way, we will learn some natural English together. To understand this story, we have to look at the situation in Western Australia after the First World War. The government gave land to many former soldiers to start new lives as farmers. They moved to the countryside with high hopes, but life was very difficult. These veterans had to deal with the harsh desert climate, and then the environment turned against them in a way they never expected. In the year 1932, a massive group of emus began to migrate toward the coast. There were about 20,000 of them. Emus are large, flightless birds, and they were very hungry. When they arrived at the farms, they started to eat the crops. This was a disaster for the farmers. The birds also destroyed the fences, which allowed rabbits to enter the fields. The farmers were desperate. They needed help to save their wheat. They sent a message to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. The government decided to send soldiers to the area. They wanted to show the farmers that the state supported them. They hoped to solve the problem quickly. The military prepared to send in soldiers armed with machine guns. This was the first time in history that a government planned to use military force against birds. They were ready to wreak havoc on the emu population. By the way, wreak havoc means to cause a large amount of damage or trouble. For example, the storm will wreak havoc on the old trees in the park. Anyway, as the soldiers arrived, they were confident. They set out to clear the land. When we say someone sets out to do something, it means they start a project or a journey with a specific goal in mind. For example, she set out to learn Spanish in 3 months. The operation seemed simple on paper. They planned to herd the birds into a small area and then fire the weapons. But the reality was much more complicated than the plan. As soon as the soldiers approached the first group of emus, the birds did something completely unexpected. They did not stand together. Instead, they split into small groups and started running in many different directions. The soldiers tried to aim their machine guns, but the emus were just too fast. They could run at 50 kilometers per hour. This was the first hint that the mission might not be as easy as they thought. It is interesting to reflect on how often humans underestimate the intelligence of animals. These birds were not just running away. They seemed to be using advanced tactics to stay safe. The soldiers were frustrated. They fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition, but they only hit a very small number of birds. The emus were simply too fast. The soldiers tried to mount a gun on a truck to chase them, but the land was too rough. The truck hit bumps and holes, and the gunner could not aim properly. The emus were moving, the truck was shaking, and the gunner was struggling. The situation began to turn out differently than everyone expected. Turn out is a phrasal verb that means something ends in a specific way, often a surprising way. For example, the cake did not turn out as I planned, but it still tasted good. It was becoming clear that the military had not taken into account the speed of the birds. To take into account means to consider a fact when making a decision. For example, you must take into account the weather when you plan a trip to the mountains. The soldiers were now exhausted. Their patience was starting to wear thin. When we say someone's patience is wearing thin, it means they are becoming annoyed and are losing their patience. For example, my patience was wearing thin after waiting for 2 hours in the rain. Every day the soldiers went out, and every day they returned with very little success. The emus were proving to be very good at avoiding the weapons. They would hide in the bushes or run into the desert where the trucks could not follow them. The farmers were not happy because the emus were still eating the wheat. By the end of the first week, the military had used over 2,000 rounds of ammunition. They had almost nothing to show for their effort. It was a complete failure. The government realized that they could not win this war. They decided to call off the operation. When you call off an event, it means you cancel it or stop it from happening. For example, the school had to call off the soccer game because of the heavy rain. It is funny to imagine the soldiers returning home. They came to fight a war, but they lost to a group of birds. This was a moment of true humiliation. The newspapers started to write about it, and soon people all over the country were laughing at the situation. It was a lesson in humility. Even though the government withdrew the soldiers, the problem with the emus did not end immediately. The birds continued to eat the crops, and the farmers had to find other, more peaceful ways to protect their land. They eventually used fences, which were much more effective than machine guns. This story shows us how sometimes nature is stronger than technology. We often think that we can control every part of our environment, but that is not always true. This campaign to stop the emus was a huge fall short of expectations. To fall short means to fail to reach a goal or a standard. For example, our efforts to clean the park fell short because we did not have enough time. Looking back on this event, it is easy to see the absurdity of it all. It is a story about human ego, the unpredictability of nature, and the limits of power. The emus effectively got the upper hand in the conflict. To get the upper hand means to gain an advantage over someone else. For example, after studying all night, I finally got the upper hand in the debate. It is a reminder that when we try to force a solution to a natural problem, we might end up creating more trouble than we fix. Nature often finds a way to survive, even when faced with modern weapons. The Great Emu War remains one of the strangest historical events in Australia. It was a time when the government fought a battle against birds and lost. In the end, the soldiers left, the emus stayed, and the wheat continued to be eaten for a little while longer until the farmers found a better solution. The birds did not really know they were at war, of course. They were just looking for food, and they did what they needed to do to survive. Perhaps we should look back on this not as a defeat, but as a lesson. We should respect nature, and we should understand that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is not to fight, but to work with the environment. It is a classic example of how planning can sometimes lead to unexpected outcomes. If you ever find yourself facing a difficult problem, just remember the Australian military in 1932. Sometimes it is better to step back, change your strategy, and try a different approach. Being persistent is good, but being smart about how you solve a problem is even better. As we conclude this story, it is worth thinking about the relationship between humans and the environment. We share this world with millions of other species, and our actions always have an effect on them. Whether it is a small bird in a garden or a large emu in the desert, every living thing is just trying to live its life. I really enjoyed sharing this story with you today. It is truly fascinating how a series of small, logical steps can lead to such an absurd outcome. History is full of these moments where the human need for order meets the chaotic reality of the natural world. I hope you found this story as intriguing as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel and like this video so you do not miss future stories. We explore fascinating topics like real stories, science, psychology, and success, while helping you master your English along the way. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you so much for listening. I am Sarah, and I will see you in the next episode. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep your curiosity alive. It has been a pleasure to spend this time with you today. Goodbye for now.